In this week's edition of Tutorial Tuesday, I'm going to discuss chasing hammer sizing um, and which chasing hammer might be right for your application. I get asked all the time what chasing hammer would be right for a specific individual's needs. And there's a common misconception that a chasing hammer should be sized according to your arm strength or arm size or the size of a person or whatnot. And I don't feel that is correct. Actually, I think it's more of the application that you'll be using it for. So what I've got here is 3 different types of hammers that I make. And this goes for any hammer, not just my hammers. If you're going to buy a hammer from one of the commercial jewelry supply stores or whatever, this goes for that as well. My hammers range from ½ ounce in size all the way up to 12 ounces in size. These are the Japanese Kinko style hammers. These are the forged cross peen chasing hammers, and these are the stubby pattern chasing hammers. And these go up to 12 ounces as well. I just don't have the larger ones in stock right now to show you. But basically, after you get, this is a 4½ ounce head here. After you get past a 4½ ounce chasing hammer, I wouldn't really consider it a chasing hammer anymore. After that, they're just kind of used mostly for repousse. You could use them for chasing on larger pieces, but mostly it's only to be pushing the metal from behind. Other than that, these are the hammers that I'll be using on the front of the pieces, again, unless they're really large pieces. So the way that I suggest to be using these hammers is to think of it in terms of pounds per square inch or surface area of your tool. So if you're using a large face tool, you are going to be needing a heavier hammer. And if you are going to be using a smaller face tool, you're going to want a smaller hammer. So basically, the theory behind it is that you're going to let the hammer do the work for you. And you're not going to have to force that head down on the tool. You're basically letting it drop, recoil, and just guiding it back into place every time. And that way you're not using up extra energy, and you can continue to do it for hours on end without as much fatigue on your joints, muscles, and all that kind of stuff. So what I've got up here are some of the different size tools and kind of the ranges of hammers that they can be used for. So this is a 12 ounce hammer, and about the only time that I'm going to be using a hammer this size is on these very large size tools here that are over say 3/4 of an inch in size, 1 inch, 1½ inch, something like that. That way this thing can really pack a punch and move a lot of metal. And again, this one is just for really big pieces. The next one down would be the 6 ounce head, and this one is kind of a tweener, but it's more of just a repousse hammer, to where you're going to be moving things from behind. You're not going to be chasing too much with this unless they're really large, extra large size chasing tools. So this one, you're going to be moving these 3/8 inch 5/16 kind of size tools, mostly embossers, not too much. You could planish with it too, the larger planishers and stuff, but not a whole lot of detail work with a hammer this size. It's just too heavy to control that much. And then we go down. These are kind of here and here are the 3 sizes that I use the most, and that's the 2 to 4½ ounce range. And so basically this 3½ ounce is used with my initial lining, some of the detail work, stuff like that. So for instance, like on this guy, I don't know if you could see the surface texture on that, but that was done with a small size tool, a 3/16 inch shank, with a 3 ounce hammer. And that's how I get that stippling in there, just by letting that hammer drop on there. If I wanted to go to a finer texture, I would be using, say for instance, on my fleur-de-lis, it's a much more refined texture here. I don't know if you could see that or if it's in focus or not. But with that, I'd be going with an 1/8 inch tool and in the 2-ounce range hammer. And again, I'm just letting it drop on the tool and just barely leaving that texture. And then when you go even finer than that, then you go over to these Kinko hammers. And this is a 1.5 ounce head. And this is kind of my go-to for carving. So when you're doing stuff like this, inlay and some of the finer stuff, engraving and whatnot, then you're going to be using this 1.5 ounce head. And then for the finest detail, the very cream of the crop, the stuff that you can only get with this little tiny 1/2 ounce head. And with this thing, you're just barely letting it drop on there and creating the most delicate, intricate texture that you can achieve. And, you know, if you're really, really good, you can do that with one of these other hammers, say a 2-ounce or whatnot, but you're really going to be having to pull back up and not letting the hammer just drop. So you'll have to kind of control the way that it drops to lessen the blow. And that takes extra energy, and so some people will just use one hammer for everything. Me personally, I like having a variety of hammers that I could just let the hammer do the work for me, and not have to worry about working extra hard. So that's basically an overview of the different types of hammers that I make and what their uses are. So again, you know, if you're doing like larger scale work, wall hanging, stuff like that, your go-to is probably going to be, in the 4-ounce range. The 3-ounce range is kind of like a nice general hammer. The 2-ounce is, for the fine stuff, earrings, stuff like that. You're probably going to want one of these smaller ones. It's really hard for me. I personally think that, these 3 are the ones that everybody should have. But, if you can't afford 3 hammers, somewhere in there would be a good place to start. Another frequent question that I'd like to address is the size of the shaft, because I get asked a lot if the shaft will support the head. And this is really strong wood, and it's really flexible wood. And the theory, again, is that you're letting the head drop. And if you use these hammers correctly, these shafts will never break. And you can see how tiny this is. I mean, it's, I don't know, maybe 3/16 of an inch thick here. But you can see that it's got a ton of bend flex to it. And this hammer, I mean, you're never going to be holding this hammer and driving down through the punch. You're just going to be letting it bounce on top of it and barely hitting the metal. So this hammer, any of these hammers, have the shaft appropriately sized to the head that they're holding, and should never break if used correctly. So anyways, that's it for this edition of Tutorial Tuesday. I hope that answered some questions out there, and if you have anything else that you would like me to talk about, or questions on this subject, please feel free to ask. Have a good day.